Today, our Kansas Jayhawks return home as we are set to face off against one of the better teams in the Big 12, the Iowa State Cyclones. The Jayhawks look to continue their undefeated season as we currently sit at 8-0. The game against Iowa State will be in Week 11, but first, we've got our Week 10 bye week. That means we'll be going through 2 weeks worth of content in one episode. So buckle up because it should be a lot of fun. In the last episode, we played against Kansas State, our big rivals in the Sunflower Showdown, and the game ended up being quite exciting and quite long, going into 5 overtimes. Now Kansas gets it back with a chance to win. Daniels looks to throw it, can't find anybody, goes short for Morrison, he's in! And the Jayhawks win it! The 15-game Sunflower Showdown losing streak is over! Honestly, I have no clue how this team is still undefeated. As I like to say, good teams find ways to win tough games, but there's got to be an element of luck involved at some point as well. Regardless, a huge win here against our arch rivals, Kansas State, a team who we do not like. The Wildcats have beaten us in 15 consecutive matchups, and I'm happy we were finally able to end the streak. But today, we embark on our toughest stretch of the season yet. None of the 8 teams we've beaten are currently above 500, but that's going to change with teams like Iowa State and Colorado on the schedule here down the stretch. I've gotten some questions about the gameplay sliders that I've been using, and I'm happy to say that I have a pretty good set that I like, and I'm happy to show them to you guys. These are the sliders that I use for today's game against Iowa State. All-American difficulty, placement passing, so if you want to give them a try, I recommend. Let's take a look at where we are before we go through Week 10. Of course, we know Jalen Daniels is in 3rd for the Heisman Trophy, and we've got a number of guys very high on the award ballots, which goes to show how good our team is right now. But it's also worth noting that most of the players here, other than Dekias Brinkley and Damani Maxson, are all seniors. And as much fun as this year has been with this roster, it's going to be a major challenge next year, given that a very large amount of our core will be gone. So we need to continue to set these young guys up for success while also continuing to win games and position ourselves for an opportunity to make the first ever 12-team college football playoff. As of now, we are currently the 7th seed in the inaugural playoff bracket, and if the season were to end today, we would host SMU in the first round, which I think would be a pretty fun game. So with that, we're not going to waste any time, and let's go through Week 10 around the nation. Of course, we don't have a game this week, but it'll still be interesting to follow many of the other matchups. We'll start with Charlotte, who's been one of the better Group 5 schools this year. They only have 1 loss, facing off against a fellow 1-loss team in Tulane, who's coming off a huge win last week against North Texas. This game ended up being quite competitive. 2 Group 5 teams vying for a potential playoff spot, but it would be Tulane, who adds another statement win to the resume, 27-21, despite a 4th quarter comeback from the Charlotte 49ers and a decent game from quarterback Max Brown. Tulane has won every big game they've played in this year. They beat Kansas State, and we know how tough they are. They beat Oklahoma, who's in the top 10, and now back-to-back weeks with wins over North Texas and Charlotte, who are 2 of the best teams within their own conference. Impressive. Number 8, Ole Miss heads to Arkansas to face off against the Razorbacks. Ole Miss looked very vulnerable to start the year, but I give them credit. They've been playing some good football as of recent. Just beat Oklahoma last week, but they fell flat. And ultimately, it's Arkansas with the upset. Woo pig! Over Ole Miss, 35-30 with 3 touchdowns from Taylon Green. A big win for an Arkansas squad who's had an underwhelming season. As for Ole Miss, they still only have 2 losses. I don't know if it's time for the sky necessarily to fall, but we might be getting close to that point because they play against Georgia next week. That's not going to be easy. SMU, number 10, adjusting well in the ACC, faces off against a 3-4 Pitt team. I wanted to see if this SMU squad would look for real against a significantly inferior opponent, and boy did they. 34-0, shutting out the Panthers, climbing to number 7. Eli Holstein with 3 interceptions, and this isn't some scrub either. Eli Holstein was on Alabama last year and had to transfer because he didn't have an easy pathway to the field. Preston Stone, meanwhile, with 3 touchdowns, leading SMU to the win. These guys are for real. They look like a legit playoff contender. Speaking of ACC teams with high playoff hopes, Virginia Tech heads to the Carrier Dome to face off against Syracuse. Kyron Drones and the Hokies won a big game last week against Georgia Tech, and Drones looked to show the world that that was not a fluke. Virginia Tech with a competitive win here against a solid Syracuse squad, 31-23. Pretty good game from Kyle McCord, but it was not enough for the Orange to get the win, as Kyron Drones puts his name high up on the Heisman list. He had a solid and efficient game through the air and a huge day on the ground with 105 yards and 2 touchdowns. Virginia Tech gets set for their biggest game of the year next week against Clemson. Texas Tech has had a great season within the Big 12, facing off against Iowa State, who we've got on the schedule next week. The Red Raiders have only lost 1 game so far in conference play, but don't tell that to the Cyclones. Rocco Becht, the sophomore quarterback, threw for 4 touchdowns, leading Iowa State to a big victory over TCU. Iowa State's a really strong school. They're always competitive with Matt Campbell as the head coach, and now they get their biggest win of the year in line to face off against us in Lawrence, Kansas. The Cyclones take this one over Texas Tech by the final score of 41-24. Rocco Becht with 4 touchdowns. He did throw 2 interceptions, but otherwise was really good. Very efficient day for running back Abu Sama III, while Jaden Higgins had a huge game through the air. Baron Morton and Taj Brooks were both pretty good, and Josh Kelly, the senior receiver, has had legitimate first-round production this year, but it was not enough for Texas Tech. They lose their 2nd game of the year within the conference. Number 1 Oregon, number 4 Michigan, one of the biggest games of the year up to this point. And this ended up being a defensive battle. Definitely Michigan's style of tempo. Oregon had to adjust. They couldn't really play their game of airing the ball down the field. And while it certainly was not pretty, the Ducks would find a way to win an ugly one. 23-17, Oregon with another huge win. They are now 9-0, obviously remaining as the number 1 ranked team in the nation. Michigan only drops to number 8, which I think is fair. Their only losses this year are against the number 1 and the number 2 teams in the country. But now with 2 losses, Michigan has a lot less margin for error. Alex Orji really struggled in this one. The Oregon defense was absolutely tremendous. And while Donovan Edwards had a good game on the ground, that wasn't enough to compensate for the rest of the offense's struggles. Dillon Gabriel, the Heisman hopeful, really did not play well. 55% completion percentage, sacked 6 times, and didn't throw for a score, although he did run for one. Evan Stewart continues his quiet streak. He still leads the nation in terms of receiving, but he's been a little underwhelming over the last few weeks. You know who wasn't underwhelming? The defense. Jeffrey Bassa, 2.5 sacks. Jordan Birch leads college football in sacks with 15. He looks like a top 10 pick in next year's draft as of now. Iowa facing off against Wisconsin. We haven't really talked about the Hawkeyes a whole lot this year, but they've quietly been playing really good football since their shutout loss against Ohio State. And that would continue into this game here against the Badgers. Despite an impressive 4th quarter comeback from Wisconsin, Iowa would end up winning this game. They still only have 2 losses, moving up to number 13. I feel like Iowa kind of controls their own destiny. If they win out, they have a real shot of making the playoff. Cade McNamara throws for 2 scores, while Deshaun Williams runs for another. The Iowa offense has been respectable, and while their defense struggled down the stretch with a big 4th quarter from Tyler Van Dyke, Wisconsin could not run the ball at all, and that's the name of the game for the Badgers. Their leading rusher at 8 yards. Florida and Georgia, one of the more fun rivalries in college football. The Gators number 25, Georgia number 6. Obviously, we know Georgia's the better team, but you got to imagine Florida's going to play them close, and that's exactly what happened in this game. But ultimately, the Bulldogs would avoid the upset. They beat Florida, and they actually jumped us in the rankings, moving up to number 4. 24-20 your final with 2 scores from Graham Mertz, but it wasn't enough to lead Florida to what would have been probably their biggest win of the Billy Napier era. They really struggled on the ground. Montrell Johnson with under 2 yards per carry. As for Georgia, Carson Beck was a little bit inefficient, but still made some big throws, tossing 3 scores, including the one at the end to win it from tight end Oscar Delp. I think maybe the most important game this week might be this matchup between Louisville and Clemson, who are both starting to fall behind a little bit in a loaded ACC. Clemson cannot afford to lose another game. They'd have no margin for error after that, while Louisville with 3 losses does have to be perfect the rest of the way if they want any shot to make the playoff. And as you can imagine, this game ended up being really exciting and went down to the wire. Very high scoring. Both quarterbacks played really well. But it is Louisville who would win this one 45-37. Both teams are now unranked. Both teams now have 3 losses. And now Clemson has no margin for error the rest of the year. And that starts next week against a great Virginia Tech squad. Cade Klubnik was phenomenal, though. He threw for 5 scores along with a big day on the ground from Phil Maffa. But the defense let them down. Tyler Shuck with 3 touchdowns, completing 80% of his passes for the Cardinals. Louisville still has some work to do, but that's a big win. A team who quietly has been playing really well is Oklahoma State. They lost a couple games earlier in the year, but it seems like they're back in business. The reason for that has been the performance of All-American running back Ollie Gordon, as he leads them to a 35-17 victory over Arizona State. And it's not so much the result of this game that matters all that much, because Oklahoma State was supposed to win this one big, and they did. But it's more so that the Cowboys are ranked number 10. Despite a pretty good game from Sam Leavitt, the freshman ended up getting the start over Taylor McDougald for Arizona State. But going back to Oklahoma State, they are now positioned to make the playoff. But they have 2 losses within the conference. That might not necessarily be a bad thing. They might not have to worry about a conference championship game. And if they win out, they are making the playoff. Ollie Gordon was fantastic, 15 yards per carry. Gordon struggled early in the year, but over the last few weeks, he has been awesome. Arizona faces off against UCF. The Knights, with only 1 loss this year, looking to challenge us in Utah at the top of the Big 12. But ultimately, it would be Arizona who gets the upset in this one. The Wildcats have been really inconsistent throughout the duration of this year, but they've had some flashy performances, such as this one today in the win over UCF, 33-28, as the Knights fall to 23 in the rankings. Noah Fifita threw for a lot of yards and a lot of touchdowns. He was picked off twice, but otherwise was pretty good. And Tesitoya McMillan had a huge game through the air. McMillan's been inconsistent on a game-to-game basis, but we've seen the flashes with him, and that's going to lead to him being a first-round pick most likely in this year's draft. KJ Jefferson, meanwhile, with a very disappointing performance for UCF. Let's head to the U. Miami faces off against a Duke team who really is not any good. This should be a blowout, but Duke ended up making this game really competitive with the Canes. Now, Miami would find a way to hang on and win, but I have a little bit of concern for this team after this performance. And Miami is a squad who I've spoken very highly of over the last couple of weeks. I still feel like they are the team to beat in the ACC over SMU, Virginia Tech, and others. But this was a red flag. I mean, they only beat Duke by 7 at home. Malik Murphy, the Texas transfer, had a good game for the Blue Devils. Cam Ward, the potential Heisman candidate, had a nice day for the Canes. But I've been saying Miami's been playing better football than everybody since the first week of the year. And now after this game, I may need to take back some of those thoughts. They're going to have to prove it to me again next week. Penn State has very quietly won 4 games in a row, but now it's time for the big game that they lose every year against Ohio State. Wait, hold on, I'm getting a phone call. Hello? Wow, you're kidding. Okay, thanks for letting me know. All right, the call was from the We're Back department. They're looking for the Penn State football program because they are back. They knock off the Buckeyes 35-28, and crazy enough, they only move up 2 spots in the rankings. I don't know why. Certainly a shaky performance from the Buckeyes, who dropped to number 15. They've lost their second game of the year. They've still, I think, put themselves in a position where if they win out, they'll make the playoff, but they definitely have less margin for error than they did previously going into this game. Drew Aller played really well, throwing for 3 scores, rushing for another, and for the first time maybe ever in his Penn State coaching career, James Franklin has won a big football game. How about that? Boise State's only loss this year was in Eugene against Oregon by a deficit of 4 points. This team has as good of a resume as any Group 5 school to make the playoff. The problem is their starting quarterback, Malachi Nelson, is out for the rest of the regular season with an injury he suffered last week. It's now the Maddox Madsen show at quarterback, but he needed some help from running back James Dubar, who replaces the also injured Ashton Jeanty. Boise State would win this game over San Diego State, but only by 3 points. I'm a little concerned for the Broncos because while I think this team is good enough to be the Group 5 rep in the playoff, and their resume certainly speaks for itself, The injuries to their star quarterback and star running back leave some questions if this team is going to be able to carry on the rest of the year. They barely won today, and it's not going to be easy as the Mountain West has been a really competitive league. Let's look at some of their scores around the rest of the country. Kentucky is back ranked as they beat the struggling Tennessee Volunteers in a blowout, 33-10. A&M takes care of business against South Carolina, and USC defeats Washington. In Big 12 play, TCU continues to play to the level of their competition, barely beating Baylor, and Kansas State ends up beating Houston. As for some other scores, Texas State, one of the top teams in the Sun Belt, wins, while Liberty barely beats Jacksonville State. USF wins their third game of the year. I still have no clue how they defeated Alabama, but okay. Florida State drops to 3-6 after losing to UNC 27-14. The rough year for the Seminoles continue. App State 7-2. They look like a really strong team in the Sun Belt, while Toledo still only has one loss inside of the back. Let's take a look at the rankings around the rest of the nation. We, of course, are still number 5 with Georgia leapfrogging us, and Michigan obviously falling below us as they lose their second game of the season. So we're going to stay at where we are for right now, but there's a lot of movement otherwise, with Ohio State dropping to 15, Ole Miss to 19. Penn State only goes up 2, which is hilarious to me, while Wake Forest and Kentucky are now both ranked. As for your players of the week, we've got Joey Aguilar, the quarterback for App State, and then the big fella, Deone Walker for Kentucky. As for the Big 12, Avery Johnson wins the Offensive Player of the Week for Kansas State, and our quarterback, Jalen Daniels, drops to 5 in the Heisman race with Cam Ward and Kyron Drones both jumping him. So something interesting about the Big 12 is that other than us in Houston, everybody else here has at least 2 losses. So even if we do lose one of our last 4 games, we'll still be at minimum top 2 within the conference, which is obviously enough to put us in the Big 12 championship. In the CFP rankings, we move up from the 7th seed to the 6th seed and will be slated to play against Rutgers in the first round. I think the committee got the top 12 right for the most part, but obviously these rankings don't really matter in the grand scheme of things, but it's still interesting to see. Before we move to the Iowa State game, I do want to talk about recruiting. And again, we've got 2 weeks worth of recruiting to go through. We'll start with week 10. We do with a new commit, 3-star defensive tackle Afia Keaho from Roman Catholic High School in Philadelphia. I think Keaho's probably going to take a couple years to find the field because he is a raw player, and I like our depth we have in the middle of the defensive line, but he is very highly ranked for a 3-star, the 3rd highest ranked prospect we've gotten to commit to the program, and the highest ranked commit from somewhere other than the state of Kansas. A number of other prospects are continuing to narrow down their list, most notably JUCO wide receiver Mario Maddox is down to 3, which means he should be set to commit pretty soon. We now have the 37th ranked class in the country, but I think that number is going to go up over the next couple of weeks, given the amount of players who are close to committing on our board. So let's take a look at where we are currently recruiting-wise. There are a number of players who we're in some tight races for, and some guys I want to go over today. We're going to go over the 2 JUCO prospects on our board currently, and the fun thing about these guys is that they're actually on the same team right now. Wide receiver Mario Maddox has played at Navarro College over the last 2 years. That's a JUCO in Central Texas, just south of the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Maddox is an interesting player because given the lack of returning talent we have in the receiving room, not only do I think he has a good chance to start for us next year, but I think he could end up being our best receiver. Maddox is an interesting case because I think he kind of fits the bill as a slot receiver, but he can also stretch the field. His skill set really isn't that different to Luke Grimm, who's ended up being one of the most valuable players for our offense this year. Now, Maddox is a little bit undersized, only 5'8", around 200 pounds, but he's lightning fast. He's got great short area quickness. He's got solid hands. And as I mentioned, he's great at taking the top off of the defense and stretching the field. I wish we knew his short route running because I think that would be really telling for what his role is going to be, but I'm hoping it's pretty good so we can line him in the slot. The big question about Maddox is the character concerns. Maddox wasn't underlooked coming out of high school. He was actually a pretty solid prospect, but nobody wanted him due to reports that he was uncoachable. He was academically ineligible at times, and his peers and teachers and coaches generally didn't have good things to say about him. Now, the good thing with Maddox is that he's completely cleaned up his act over the last 2 years, and everyone we've talked to has nothing but good things to say about him. Teams are still clearly scared by his past, but I think he's a young man who's worthy of the second chance. The first time we saw Maddox play in person was when Navarro College headed up to the state of Kansas to face off against Hutchinson College. And in that game, I was impressed by Maddox's teammate, Ahmad Dunham, who is the right tackle for Navarro College. Dunham has a very different story than Maddox because he was not highly regarded coming out of high school. He had to go the JUCO route because he really didn't have any other choice. But over the last 2 years, he has played really, really well for Navarro College. We haven't scouted him yet, interestingly, so we might as well do that now. It doesn't look like he is a gem or a bust, so he's probably going to live up to the 3-star billing. But nonetheless, I think he has a chance to start for us on the offensive line next year, especially given that our current right tackle, Bryce Cabledew, is an upperclassman. With Dunham, you're getting a big kid, 6'4", 294 pounds. I think he's got solid play strength. And again, he looks like a man amongst boys at the JUCO level. And obviously, it's a big jump going from a much lower level of competition to not just Division I, but the Big 12. Nonetheless, I think Dunham's an interesting player who, again, will get to compete for the starting spot at right tackle and could be a starter for us over the next 2 seasons. Dunham has solid short area quickness and wins with finesse. And again, I'm hopeful he'll get the opportunity to compete for a starting job for us as soon as next year. Dunham is not the only guy who we haven't fully scouted yet, so we're going to do that now. And we're going to start with running back Kane McKeithen, who ends up being a bust. But we're so far into the battle, we're going to continue to go after him, and I think his ratings really don't look that bad. Kicker Anthony Escalante is also a bust, but his ratings are better than any current special teamer we have, so we're going to continue to go after him. Safety Adrien Bourgeois does not end up being a bust or a gem. He looks pretty solid, so I would say he's going to live up to his ranking. And then we are going to continue to utilize the rest of our points by scheduling visits, such as for quarterback DeAndre Rainbolt. I think he's a guy we're going to go into detail about during the next episode. And then we're also going to offer a visit to tight end Pierre Johnson. We already have a pretty good tight end who I'm expecting to commit soon with Isaiah Lamore, who we went over in the last episode. But we have multiple tight ends in this class, so I'm quite fond over. From there, I ended up switching a few points around for some of the other players. But for the most part, I really didn't have to make many tough decisions this week because, again, a lot of our highest guys have already committed. And I feel like this part of the year is the easiest of recruiting. The calm before the storm, if you will, which, of course, the storm being the transfer portal. No new commitments into Week 11, but we do have 2 prospects down to 3, linebacker Devontae Crispin, and then the JUCO tackle Ahmad Dunham, both of whom are expected to commit to our program pretty soon. I'm going to utilize some of my recruiting points into the wide receiver and tight end spot because I want to give Mario Maddox more points. He still hasn't committed yet, and he's going to visit Georgia Tech next week. I'd rather not let him get that opportunity. I'd rather have him commit sooner than later. We're going to give visits to linebacker Mo Nwokeji and kicker Anthony Escalante. And from there, we only have 15 points remaining. I'm actually going to take some of these guys off the board. I put them on because there wasn't a lot of interest from other schools. And some of these guys still really don't have much interest. But I realized I don't want to low lock cheese these guys. I want to add to the challenge. So I'm going to take those guys off the board. This is how I'm going to use the rest of my points, most notably Mario Maddox now getting 65 recruiting hours put into him because, again, I want to have his commitment done now with Georgia Tech and Vanderbilt both just entering the race. So now let's take a look at our matchup here against Iowa State. 5-3, 3-2 in conference, coming off a big win last week against Texas Tech. And as I mentioned, there is room for error within the Big 12, being that us and Utah are the only teams with less than 2 losses. And obviously, both of us are undefeated. We're 2 of the 3 remaining undefeated teams, along with Oregon, in all of college football. Now, if we do lose one game, we're going to have to be a little bit more cautious because Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, UCF, Colorado, Cincinnati, even Iowa State, they're all chasing us. So us and Utah still have to play well and continue to perform. Of course, that starts with this matchup against the Cyclones. They lost to Iowa, who's proven to be a really good team. They lost to Houston. We know they're no easy slouch. And they lost to UCF. But their win against Texas Tech this past week is the statement win that this program has been looking for. They have a really tough schedule to end the year, though. They play against both us and Utah. Rocco Beck, the redshirt sophomore, leads the way at quarterback. Becht has had a pretty solid year for the most part. Nothing spectacular, but he's been pretty good. And this is a young team. Running back Abu Sama III is one of the most dynamic young players in the conference. And they've got a great receiving duo with Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel, two of the highest rated players on the roster. Their secondary is also a major strength, but they lack a little bit in the trenches, and I'm hoping that's where we're going to be able to beat them today. So let's get this show on the road. Week 11 here at the booth. Our second time playing at the revised stadium, and our second to last home game of the year. Facing off against an Iowa State squad who's really solid. One of the better teams we're going to face off against this year. And obviously, as we've seen our Big 12 schedule progress, our games are continuing to get weirder and weirder. From a 5-overtime win against Kansas State to an 18-point comeback within 3 minutes against Houston. So Iowa State will start with the football. They've got a talented young quarterback and a great group of skill possessions with a dynamic running back and a phenomenal duo at wide receiver. On 2nd and 9, this short pass is caught by the tight end, Benjamin Brommer, and that one will go for a first down here for the Cyclones. Another 2nd and 9. Here is Rocco Becht looking down the field. He's got Jalen Noel. So far, so good for the Iowa State offense. They're moving it nicely. 3rd down and 5. It's a run with Abu Sama, the standout sophomore, and he only gets a yard, wrapped up by Dylan Brooks. From there, Iowa State would elect to punt the ball, wanting to win the field position battle. So the Kansas defense starts this game off with a stop. And now we will see the Jayhawk offense, who has scored at least 40 points in each of their last 3 games. Albeit 2 went into overtime, but still, that's neither here nor there. On 3rd down, here's Lawrence Arnold up the middle. He gets around 22. Good play after the catch by the standout senior. And that'll lead us to another 3rd down, this time 3rd and 10. Daniels steps up in the pocket on the run. Looking downfield, Luke Grimm wide open inside the 20 to around the 17. Why did nobody cover him? He had all that space, leading to a gain of over 30 yards. 3rd and 3 now. Daniels under pressure, evades the sack with room to run. Showboats for a score. And the Jayhawks strike first. They lead it 7-0. What a play and what a drive for Jalen Daniels, showing off his impressive ability on the run as a dual threat quarterback because, well, we saw him making big throws out of structure and making big plays with his legs. On the touchdown, as you can see, Iowa State sends a blitz, but he breaks the tackle from the incoming defender, the safety Malik Verdon, and from there's nobody in front of them to stop him. So it's now 7-0, 2nd and 3 for the Cyclones. Becht keeps it himself, and he's losing yardage. Dylan Watke, the transfer from Youngstown State, continues his solid year. 3rd and 6 now for the Cyclones. Becht looks to throw it. Short pass is caught. It's a screen for Abu Sama, who will not get the first down. Mello Dotson with the initial hit, and Damani Maxson finishes off the play. 7-0 through the first quarter. Really good start for the Jayhawks. We've only had 1 possession, but it was a 90-yard touchdown drive. And then defensively, we've looked pretty good. 2 drives, no points. Up the middle on 3rd down, it's Daniel Highshaw Jr. who gets the first down. That'll keep the chains moving. 3rd and 8, Daniels under pressure, looking downfield. He connects. That pass is hauled in by the Grim Reaper, Luke Grimm, for another first down. Grimm continues to get better and better as the year goes along. 2nd and 11. Daniels, pump fake, rolls right, has Grimm wide open in the back of the end zone. It's caught for a score. Why is Iowa State not covering him? He's been one of the best receivers in the Big 12. He had 250 yards against Houston. I mean, what are we doing? That's 2 times now where he's had all the space in the world, and this time it directly results for 6. Good throw on the run from Daniels, who has looked outstanding so far today, and Kansas leads 14-0. Iowa State back with it. Wide open on the RPO, it's Jaden Higgins, who gets the first down, breaking tackles. Higgins with over 120 yards in the win against Texas Tech a week ago. Iowa State moving it nicely from the 31. Here's Abu Sama to the right side, gets a first down, and he is into the red zone. The Cyclones are finally having a good drive as we near the 2-minute warning. On 1st down, it's a short throw, hauled in by the fullback. That's Stevo Klotz, who gets it inside the 10, and that brings us to the 2-minute warning. Second and goal. Beck goes short. It's caught by Jalen Noel for the touchdown. And Iowa State's on the board. It looks like they're going to make it a game. And it's now 14-7. Good drive for Iowa State. They needed that one badly. And the Jayhawks get it back. Play action here on first down. Daniels under pressure on the run. He connects with Arnold past the 50. Really good throw by Daniels with two guys in his face. It looks like he was kind of throwing off his back foot, and he still places it perfectly in the breadbasket. Devin Neal to the left side with blocks. Has space inside the 25. Devin Neal's been quiet today. He only had 13 rushing yards before that gain. But now it looks like he's moving after his big performance against Kansas State. Daniels with a risky throw. It's hauled in by Quentin Skinner, and that'll put Kansas at the 5. Second and goal from the 2. Can they punch it in? Daniel Highshot Jr. walks it in for a touchdown, and Kansas adds to the lead as it's 21-7. The Jayhawks have only had 3 possessions in this game, but they have found the end zone every time they've gotten the ball. The offense has been perfect, and now Iowa State has to respond with around 45 seconds left. Beck on second down, looks for the sidelines. It's hauled in by Jaden Higgins, and that one goes for a first down. But they have to call a timeout because his knee was down inbounds. They couldn't stop the clock. Following play, Beck under pressure. Fumble! Wutke rips it away, and he recovers it himself and is wrapped up past the 30. Dylan Wutke with the strip sack and the scoop. And Kansas gets excellent field position and an opportunity to add to the lead with around 30 seconds left in the half. The senior continuing to make plays behind the line of scrimmage. Now we've got to see if that was actually a fumble or not. And as we look at the replay, I think it's close, but it looks like he does lose possession of the ball before Beck is down. There's going to be no review, and so the play will stand. Kansas with the turnover. First down from the 29, play action. Daniels under a lot of pressure on the run. Fires again. He's got Arnold, and he is inside the 5 for a gain of 25. Jalen Daniels with over 200 yards now in the first half, and Kansas now has it at the goal line with under 20 seconds to go. First and goal from around the 3. Daniels rolls right. He fires. It's caught for a score. The senior, Quentin Skinner, comes down with it. And that'll wrap up an awesome first half for Kansas. We lead at 28-7. I feel like all year we've played down to competition, so it's really refreshing to see the team clicking on both sides of the ball. Offensively, we've been perfect. We've scored touchdowns every time we've gotten the ball. Jalen Daniels looks like the Heisman Trophy winner out there. He's been phenomenal on the ground. As a passer, I think that was his best first half of the year, and that says something given how good he's been all year. And defensively, we've been really solid as well. Iowa State has 1 touchdown drive, but otherwise, they've really got nothing going. It's a phenomenal first half for Kansas, but as we know, we cannot let the pedal off the metal. If we can come back down 3 scores in 3 minutes, then Iowa State can do it in 2 quarters. Now, we will start the third quarter with the ball, so that's certainly a positive. We'll see if the offense can get a 5th consecutive touchdown as Daniels has plenty of time to throw it. Now he looks to run with it, and he's got space. A first down run for Jalen Daniels as he gets around 14. Looks like there might have been a late hit there, but unfortunately no flag. From the 42, Daniels, it's an RPO screen. It's caught by Skinner, and he is smothered in the backfield for a loss of a yard. Finally, something positive from the Iowa State defense. Second and 11. Daniels under pressure, fumble, strip sack, and it is recovered by Bryce Cable through the left tackle, but it's a loss of 20 for the Jayhawks. Kennard Snyder, the junior left end, with the strip sack. Third down and 31 now. Daniels figures he might as well floats it up, and it is broken up in the secondary, incomplete. It looked like Skinner actually was kind of open, but Jontez Williams deflects it, and the Jayhawks have to punt it for the first time today. Iowa State back with it as Abusama loses yardage. He is wrapped up on the play by the senior linebacker, Cornell Wheeler. Third down and 3 now for the Cyclones. Beck looks to throw it, looks short up the middle. It's hauled in for a first down by Jaden Higgins, who keeps the chains moving. Third and 3 now for Iowa State, a little under halfway through the quarter. It's a wheel route. Abusama wide open inside the 10, breaks the tackle from Devin Dye, and is wrapped up inside the 5 by Wheeler. I feel like Sama's been really consistent on the ground. Not a ton of big plays, But that was the splash play they had been waiting for. First and goal, Carson Hansen is in for a touchdown. And Iowa State's continuing to keep themselves in it as the lead is now down to 14. Good start to the third quarter for the Cyclones as they get a stop on defense, touchdown on offense, and now we got to respond. 3rd and 4, what a throw by Daniels, threading the needle as he connects with Quentin Skinner for a gain of 23. That throw was put tightly into coverage, and Skinner still comes down with it. 3rd and 10, Daniels steps up in the pocket, breaks a sack, and runs for a first down. I mean, this guy is Houdini. Whatever we need out of him, he's going to continue to give us. Now from around the 31, the tight end Jared Casey is the motion man. Play action for Neal. Daniels, no time to throw it, he's sacked again. Kennard Snyder with his second sack of the quarter. And that'll lead to a 3rd down and 20 now for the offense. And they're certainly not in field goal range. It's going to be a screen here for Devin Neal. Try to get in range for the kicker as he gets around 13. The game is suggesting we punt the ball, but I actually think it's worth it to try to the field goal. Owen Piper-Gerdes has played quite well over the last few weeks. From 52, it's going to be close. It's no good! I think it had the accuracy, but it was just a little bit short. Maybe off by a yard or two. Really not that bad of a kick in the grand scheme of things as he just missed it. But it will remain a 2-score lead with around 40 seconds left in the third. And the door is open for Iowa State as we go into the fourth. We still lead this game by multiple possessions, but if Iowa State gets something here on offense, you never know, they could put themselves back into the game as we look to maintain our top 5 ranking in the CFP poll. 3rd down and 6. First play of the fourth quarter here for Iowa State. Everybody in this stadium on their feet. Becht looks to throw it, launches into double coverage, it's picked! Marvelous Marvin Grant, the senior with his first interception of the year, and Kansas forces the turnover. I cannot stress this enough. What was Rocco Becht thinking? Even if Marvin Grant wasn't there, it still would have been deflected by Mello Dotson. He launches it into double coverage where the 2 DBs are going to have an opportunity to play for the ball before the receiver does. That was just an absolutely awful read, and Kansas gets it back. They haven't scored since the first half, but they're looking to change that here with a big run from Devin Neal, who brings it inside the 40. And the Jayhawks are moving it nicely. Following play, here's Daniels. Rolls to the right, looking downfield. He connects with Grimm. Grimm taunts the defender as he goes in for his second touchdown of the afternoon. Luke Grimm is him. 3-score lead now for the Jayhawks. The Grim Reaper looking to kill off Iowa State's chances, and he does so in style. Taunting the defensive back, who clearly did not look too happy with him, pushing him into the deck after getting into the end zone. That was cornerback Miles Purchase, number 5, who may have just purchased himself a spot on the bench. Love to see it from Luke Grimm. Sneaky athlete, first guy in, last guy out, plays with a ton of grit. As that pass is caught just shy of the first down marker by Daniel Jackson. Iowa State's down by 21. They don't have a choice. They got to go for it. It's an RPO, and it's broken up. What a hit in the secondary from Mello Dotson. And Kansas gets it back as they look to potentially add to the lead. 3rd and 1. Devin Neal with a first down. Jukes away from the defender, and he gets it to the 30. Under 6 to go. Now it is a 3rd and 10 here for the Jayhawks. Daniels looks to be calling for an audible. Play action. Looks to throw it. Under pressure, goes downfield. It's hauled in for a first down by Quentin Skinner, who's had probably his best game of the year as he gets around 20. 1st and goal now from the 1. The Jayhawks very close to punching it in, and it looks like they will. Devin Neal runs around defenders, in for a score, and Kansas adds to the lead, turning this game into an all-out blowout. 42-14. What an impressive performance by a Kansas team who has played everybody in this conference super close all year. And now all of a sudden facing off against one of the better teams on our schedule, and we are mopping the floor with them. And this touchdown from Devin Neal should be the one that puts the icing on the cake with around 4 minutes to go. 3rd and 1 here for Iowa State. Becht looks to throw it. Under pressure, up the middle. That's a first down. Nice catch as Iowa State's able to move the chains. Now at around the 50, following play, Becht looks to throw it again. Under pressure, he's sacked! It's Takaius Brinkley, the true freshman, with sack number, I think, 12 on the year. I've lost count, but he's got a lot. 3rd and 20. Backed under pressure. Sacked again. Zacchaeus Brinkley with another play. His second sack at the drive. Iowa State might as well go for it. I mean, it's 4th and 25. What do they have to lose? As Becht looks to throw it downfield, it's caught. Actually pretty close to the first down marker, but just shy. As the Jayhawks get the stop. Now with it on offense, it is a 3rd and 2. Daniels looks to throw it under pressure, throws out of the sack incomplete. We got a lot of backups in the game, but Daniels, interestingly, is still in. And we want to end this game now. We're going to go for it here on 4th down, but Torrey Loughlin is stopped behind the line of scrimmage. Nice tackle there by Iowa State as he's wrapped up by number 50, Caleb Bacon, the reigning Big 12 Defensive Player of the Week. Cyclones back with it. Becht up the middle. He connects with Jaden Higgins, who's over 100 yards on the day, 7 for 112, and he's got it inside the 10. 3rd and goal now for Iowa State, looking to make this game a little bit closer. Becht looks to throw it, and that one is broken up, out of bounds, and complete by the freshman corner, Jalen Todd, one of the many backups now in the game. 4th and goal here for the Cyclones. It's a run with Abu Sama, and he does not get it. Wrapped up by Taiwan Berryhill Jr., and that'll do it. What an impressive win here for the Jayhawks, 42-14. I think this is our best win of the year. I mean, we look complete pretty much the entire way. JD4 with 4 total touchdowns and a season-high 382 passing yards, while also being ultra-efficient, completing nearly 76% of his passes. This was Daniels' best game of the year. I mean, he looked awesome, throwing the ball, running the ball. Dude was electric. The skill position players were good. The offensive line was mostly good, and the defense had easily their best game in Big 12 play as we led up under 24 points for the first time in our in-conference slate, improving to 9-0 on the year, 6-0 within the conference. Again, what a performance across the board. 28-37, 382, 3 scores for Jalen Daniels. He looked like a Heisman caliber player out there, and not only that, but he also looks all the part of a first-round pick, and his draft stock continues to go up and up and up. Through the air, Quentin Skinner had his best game of the year. Luke Grimm, playmaker. He is turning into one of the best players on this team, period. The run game was good. The offensive line, other than Bryce Cable, was pretty good. And then defensively, lights out. 2 sacks for Brinkley, the interception, of course, by Grant, and the strip sack by Dylan Wutke. As for Iowa State, certainly not the best performance for Rocco Becht. He wasn't horrible, but I wouldn't say he was good. Abu Sama was pretty solid. Nothing spectacular, but solid. Jaden Higgins had a good game through the air. We couldn't really cover him. He had 7 for 112, but he was really the only bright spot today for Iowa State. Him and Kennard Snyder, who had 2 sacks, including a strip sack. So with that, we will simulate the week, and let's take a look at Week 11 around the nation. We'll start things off with Texas State. We haven't really talked about these guys this year. They only have 1 loss and look like a possible contender for the Group 5 spot in the playoff. The star of the show today was quarterback Jordan McLeod. The transfer from James Madison threw for 7 touchdowns. Texas State wins big, 56-21. McLeod with an unreal performance, and he's been great all year. But encapsulating it today against UL Monroe, led by the Oklahoma transfer, General Booty, who did not have a particularly good game through the air. Let's head to Indiana. The Hoosiers are quietly 6-3, facing off against a Michigan team who kind of has to win this game. They just lost against Oregon. They really can't afford to lose another. But they would. Indiana shocks the reigning champions 31-25, and this game is especially fascinating, really, for both of these teams. We'll start with Indiana. They're 7-3 and in 3rd place in the Big Ten. You know, there's a real path for them to make the conference championship. They're still unranked, which at this point is blasphemous. 7-3 in the Big Ten with a signature win against Michigan. They should be in the top 25, period. As for the Wolverines, their margin for error is now basically at 0. I really wasn't too concerned after the losses to Oregon and Texas because those are 1 and 2 in the nation. But losing to Indiana, I'm now concerned. I think if Michigan wins out, they still make the playoff, but they still have to go to the shoe and face off against Ohio State. On a scale of 1 to 10, I think the panic meter is at around an 8. If I was a Wolverine fan, I'd be getting worried. The team who beat Michigan last week was the number 1 ranked Oregon Ducks, and I think 10 wins in the Big 12 is basically a lock for the college football playoff. Oregon, for what it's worth, currently 9-0, so they really only have to win 1 more game. Problem is, they didn't really show up here against Maryland today, and the Terps made this a really competitive game. Ultimately, the Ducks were able to avoid the upset, winning their 10th game of the year, the first team in the country to win double-digit games, but they did not win this one convincingly against a 3-7 Maryland squad who had no business keeping this game close. 38-31, your final in favor of the Ducks, who again improved to 10-0, obviously staying at number 1. But this is probably Oregon's worst performance of the year. They looked vulnerable in this game. I still feel like they're probably the overall favorite to win the national title. But Dylan Gabriel's had some sloppy games as of recent. This was not one of them, though. He was lights out, with Trayshawn Holden leading the way receiving-wise as Evan Stewart continues his cold streak, if you will. And Tez Johnson, I feel like, has been kind of quiet throughout the duration of the entire year. Ole Miss just lost their second game of the year. There's not a lot of margin for error left. The problem is they're facing off against number 4 Georgia, and, well, this game went about as poorly as Ole Miss could have asked for. The Bulldogs ran away with it. It really wasn't all that close. 35-14. Ole Miss entered the day ranked in the top 10, and now they are unranked, period. I would be a little bit fearful if I was an Ole Miss fan. Actually, not true. I would be very fearful because I think 3 losses is kind of walking on the edge of not making the playoff, and especially with Ole Miss being unranked this late in the year, like, at least Michigan is still ranked in the top 20, and they still get a chance to prove themselves against Ohio State. So if the Michigan panic meter is at an 8, the Ole Miss panic meter should be at about a 14. Let's head to Georgia Tech. Haynes King is still the Heisman frontrunner, but he hasn't played all that well over the last couple of weeks. Now he gets an opportunity to beat up on one of the best teams in the country, but that ultimately did not happen. Miami continues the win streak with another solid performance from Cam Ward, who he himself is also looking like a Heisman contender. The Canes win their 9th consecutive game of the year. They improved to 9-1. They would actually jump us inside of the rankings. They are now number 5, and we are now number 6. 38-24, your final. As I've been saying, Miami's been playing some great football. Even though they were shaky last week, this is a much-needed response. Haynes King threw 2 interceptions. He did complete 80% of his passes, but certainly not his best day, whereas Cam Ward was efficient, threw for 3 scores. Damian Martinez, huge game on the ground. And now Miami just needs to stay the course, and not only are they going to get a playoff spot, but I think they could get a bye. Fresno State and Air Force, 2 of the best teams in the Mountain West, each with only 2 losses this year. If somebody has a chance to dethrone Boise State in this conference, I think it's one of these 2 teams, especially Fresno State, who's had a great year. However, they would ultimately drop this game to the Air Force Falcons in what ended up being a pretty exciting matchup, 24-16. So now that Fresno State has 3 losses, any long shot hope of them making the playoff is dead. It's certainly still a slim chance for Air Force, considering they're not ranked at all. But if they win out, beat Boise State in the conference championship, and have some luck within some of the other conferences, I guess it's possible. Rutgers, of course, only has 1 loss. They control their own fate. If they win out, they are going to the Big Ten championship. And here in this game against Minnesota, the Scarlet Knights would take care of business. Rutgers is now 8-1, and their final 3 regular season games don't appear to be all that challenging. They've got Maryland, Illinois, and Michigan State. Those 3 teams aren't slouches. I mean, Maryland almost beat the Ducks for crying out loud, but Rutgers should win all of those games. Even if they lose 1, I still think they have a good chance to make the playoff. They're now number 8, and they are looking the part of a legitimate playoff contender. I certainly did not see this coming into the year, but Athan Kaliakmanis had another good game, while Kyle Monangai played well too, and Christian Dremel scored twice. Clemson faces off against Virginia Tech. This is a must-win game for both teams, so I'm really excited to see how this one goes. Very similar to the game that Clemson had last week, and ended up being down to the wire, high scoring, and also similar to Clemson's game last week, they would end up losing. Kyron Drones with possibly his Heisman moment in a statement win for Virginia Tech as they knock off the Tigers, and now Virginia Tech has prime positioning to make the playoff, even if they don't make the ACC championship. With Miami and SMU currently ahead of them in the standings, Virginia Tech's in a good spot where if they win out, I think they're basically locked in. And for those of you who want fun teams in the playoff, I would be rooting for Virginia Tech because Kyron Drones is box office television. Cade Klubnik, I've got to say, has played really well over the last couple of weeks. He is not at fault for Clemson's skid. Their defense is just completely fallen apart. They are now 5-4. They have zero shot of making the playoff. I think Clemson might be the best 4-loss team in the country, but they've got to find a way to win these games, and they're not doing so. Let's head to Missouri. Obviously, it's been a disappointing season for the Tigers. They're facing off against number 9 Oklahoma, and Oklahoma's in the same spot as Virginia Tech. 2 losses. If they win out, they are going to make the playoff. The problem is, I think Oklahoma may have overlooked this game a little bit on the schedule. And Missouri would ultimately complete the upset over the Sooners, despite the fact that potential first-round receiver Luther Burden only had 13 yards. 24-17 in favor of the Tigers as Oklahoma drops all the way to 20. Now, being a 3-loss team in the SEC, it's not a death sentence, and they still have a shot to make the playoff, but their chances take a drastic hit with this loss against Missouri, and now Oklahoma, much like Michigan and Ole Miss and other 3-loss schools, have no margin for error. Jackson Arnold struggled, and they couldn't run the ball in this game. Florida State heads to South Bend to take on Notre Dame. The Irish had a losing streak earlier in the year, but they quietly have been playing some pretty good football as of recent, facing off against their rivals. This game ended up being close, but Notre Dame would take care of business, winning this one 28-25. What a disappointing season from the Seminoles. 1 year removed from making the playoff. Now they are 3-7. DJ Uiagalelei did not perform well. He was picked off 3 times. As for Notre Dame, I think if they win out, they've certainly got a shot to make the playoff. I don't think they're a lock, but they're ahead of a lot of these 3-loss teams like Michigan and Oklahoma. So with all of these upsets, a school like Iowa now gets to be pushed up to the forefront. If they win out, I'm confident they will make the playoff. The problem is, it's Iowa football, and while they are a good program, it never feels like they're able to take that step, and I feel like that was encapsulated today in their loss against UCLA. The Hawkeyes now have 3 losses, and I don't think they have the resume that, say, Michigan and Oklahoma does. With the Hawkeyes dropping to number 25, I feel like they're in a lot of trouble, and the slim playoff hype that lasted around half an hour is now over for the Hawkeyes. And for those of you who enjoy exciting football, I think this is probably a sigh of relief. Thank God. Next up, we're going to head to Happy Valley. Penn State actually won a big game. They beat Ohio State, but with their struggles early in the year, they still have no margin for error because they already have 3 losses. They did struggle in this game, though, against Washington. They would end up winning, but it was a lot closer than it should have been, 29-28. So Penn State would actually move up quite a bit farther from 22-17, a bigger jump than they got last week, which is kind of odd, but okay. Huge performance on the ground for Nick Singleton. I'm curious to see if Penn State ends up winning their final couple of games and ends up making the playoff. They're red hot. They've been playing better football than anybody over the last month. Alabama heads to LSU to face off against the Tigers. The Crimson Tide has 3 losses, but given how good they've been in SEC play, I feel like they do actually control their own destiny. This game ended up being close. These 2 teams are, of course, rivals, but Jalen Milroe would continue his phenomenal stretch, leading Alabama to the win over LSU. And the more and more I watch Jalen Milroe throughout the year, the more and more I think he has a shot to be the first quarterback off the board. He has played fantastic over the last 2 months, and this was honestly one of his lesser games this year. He didn't even play all that well for his standards, but he has been so good in SEC play. Ever since Alabama lost their first 2 games of the year against Western Kentucky and USF, they've been playing some good football. Now, they've had a few too many close games, barely beating inferior opponents like LSU, but they also almost beat Georgia. I feel like they're playing to their level of competition, and I'm curious to see if that's going to be enough for them to win out and presumably get a spot towards the bottom of the playoff. Regardless, I would not want to face off against Alabama in the first round because I think they are a major threat. The last few games we're going to cover, all within the Big 12, as Oklahoma faces off against TCU. If I'm Oklahoma, I'm nervous. TCU plays to the level of their competition, good or bad. However, what TCU doesn't have is Ollie Gordon II, and that ended up being the difference here for Oklahoma State. They win this game, staying in the top 10, despite a good fourth quarter comeback from the Horned Frogs. But as I mentioned last week, with how well Ollie Gordon and this team is playing, if they win out, they're probably going to make the playoff. Now, I will say, if they lose, I think they're done. I can't see a 3-loss team from the Big 12 getting in over 3-loss schools from the Big 10 or the SEC. But with how well Oklahoma State's playing, I'd be pretty confident if I was a Cowboys fan. Colorado and Texas Tech, both of these teams have 2 losses within the conference, and their slim conference title hopes are kind of on the line today. The Buffaloes have lost 2 in a row after their 6-0 start. And I will say for Colorado, the good news here is that they didn't lose this game. The bad news is that they got slaughtered in this game. Texas Tech annihilated Colorado 31-7 with 2 touchdowns from the 5-star true freshman Micah Hudson. On the scale of 1 to 10 for the panic meter, I think I'd put it at around 100 for Colorado because they've lost 3 in a row, and their next 2 games are against unbeaten Utah and unbeaten Kansas. Yikes. Shedeur Sanders did not play well at all today. I feel like his stock is continuing to go down. While Texas Tech's offense was really good, their defense was really good. And now we head to the final game of the day. Utah and BYU, a rivalry. This ended up being a really exciting matchup that went into overtime. Utah got the ball first, but they didn't keep it for long. A 1-play drive is all they needed as Dorian Senior, the transfer of USC, by way of Arizona, would strike to put the Utes up 35-28. With their undefeated season on the line, they needed to stop defensively, and they would get it as Jerry Bohannon is sacked, and Utah remains unbeaten, squeaking away from BYU 35-28, although they do drop a spot in the poll as Georgia leapfrogs them. BYU did play pretty well in this game, and if I was BYU's opponent next week, I'd be a little nervous considering how good they looked. I'm saying that because we're playing BYU next week on the road. It's going to be a challenging game as they held Utah in check to a really exciting matchup. But us and the Utes continuing to win games, and it's continuing to look like a Kansas-Utah Big 12 championship until further notice. Here's a look at the other scores around the rest of the country. No other major surprises in terms of the top 25. And then in the Big 12, West Virginia actually won their 2nd win of the year. I don't believe it. As per the other scores, Appalachian State with a thriller against Coastal Carolina. They are now 8-2. Wake Forest was ranked this week, and that ends up being short-lived. They lose to Cal. Tennessee gets blasted by Mississippi State. It has been a rough year for the Vols. They are now 3-6. Talk about disappointment. As for your new look at the rankings, as I mentioned, we ended up dropping a spot. Both us and Utah actually moved down, with Georgia passing Utah and Miami jumping us. This tells me that the College Football Playoff Committee values the ACC more than the Big 12 because Miami has a loss and they're still ahead of us, which is kind of fascinating. As for the conference standings, as I mentioned, us and Utah still clearly at the top, and it would take, at this point, a lot for the conference championship to not be Utah and the Jayhawks. And if both teams are still undefeated, that's going to be a great game. Matthew Golden, the Offensive Player of the Week, while Neto Okpala wins the Defensive Player of the Week. I really don't know how Jordan McLeod didn't win it, the Texas State quarterback who threw for 7 scores. As for the Heisman watch, I figured Jalen Daniels would take a big leap. He actually didn't. The top 4 guys all switched spots. Dylan Gabriel is now in 1st, but Daniels, despite his awesome performance against Iowa State, stays in 5th. It's weird. We have all these close games and we're moving up a lot, but then we play our best game of the year and we drop in the rankings, and Jalen Daniels' spot in the Heisman, it doesn't switch. We're still the 6th seed right now in the playoff, and we will be slated to face off against 3-loss Alabama in the first round. Imagine telling someone at the beginning of the year after their first 2 losses that the Tide would be slated to make the playoff. Week 12 does not have any top 25 matchups, but I actually think that makes things a little bit more interesting because all the top teams, they can't lose or else they're going to drop a lot. And that includes us as we face off against 3-6 BYU. Not going to be an easy game though. Lavelle Edwards Stadium is a tough place to play at. I hope everybody enjoyed the episode. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Peace out.